Exactly. Congratulations or condolences on that. That is it right there, by the way. It's 100 and some odd pages, right? 150 pages. And think about that as a tool for someone to decide what it is they're going to do. So one of the things we're fond of saying in community colleges, by the way, is we can't structure things for students. They're undecided. They don't know what they want to do. Why would we expect them to know what they want? We've done absolutely nothing to help them. Career counseling in high school has gotten pretty much non-existent around this country. It's whatever we had in it. We have small career centers that tend to have 1 or 2 people, and usually it does a great job for those who actually get there, but most of our students don't get there. So this idea that students can't choose what they want to do and it's their fault or it's their indecision, I think there's a pretty suspect hypothesis here that this is really their issue and not ours. Right? We've done nothing to help them. And so this idea, and by the way, the too many choices thing, you guys have been to or heard of the Cheesecake Factory? Ever seen the menu in the Cheesecake Factory? It's got about 350 items on it. It's literally, it's crazy. And so they've done some research on this, some social psych research on choice. And what they found is that once you get past a certain number of choices, people get paralyzed. And what's fascinating about this is if you actually look at what's ordered at the Cheesecake Factory, like the 5 top items, it's basically the 5 items you would get at Applebee's, who's got a menu that's 1/10 the size, because people can't process this. They can't process that much information. There's a reason, by the way, in retail stores, they put stuff on the end of the aisle, because they don't want people standing in front of the 40 different versions of soup looking to try to figure out which one they're going to have. There's the whole idea of that people get paralyzed with too much choices. Lots of research from industry, research from psych on this. And we get, by the way, those choices, at least they have some idea of what they are looking for. Our choices, they have no idea. So this issue of structure, let me ask you this. Where in our program, we do have structure, by the way, in community colleges. Where is that structure? Where do we have structured programs right now? Was that? So that's required. So if we literally say you have to take these 3 courses, that's one place. What are some other places? Where do we have structure? We were just talking about it. Technical programs, right? These classically what we call career tech programs. So, okay, we have lots of structure in career tech programs, like nursing, not just nursing, because nursing we tend to throw to the side a little bit because it does have entrance requirements. So you think about success rates in nursing being really high. Partially you can explain that by these are really great students and the ones who made it through. But lots of our career tech programs don't have entrance requirements. And what are the success rates in most of those career tech programs, completion rates? They hover, by the way, in the 60%, 70%, 80% range. What is the completion rate for our gen ed students? 25%, 30%, right? So this is not to say this is the only difference. So what are some differences between career tech and gen ed programs? Was that? They, being the program or the student, or both? Yes. There's a clear goal. And what is that goal, by the way, when you're finishing the program? You're going to get a wage, a living wage, if not a better than living wage. And so, cohorting, there's another good one. There's a big issue there, cohorts. What else do you have? You have highly structured programs. Less prerequisites, highly structured programs. Practical experience, it's hands-on, there's a context for it, right? Say more.
Technical programs, they're kind of planning this is going to be my 1 year, my 2 years, whatever, whereas the person who's coming in gen ed knows they're going to transfer.
Right.
They may do it now, they may do it later.
So we've made a logic leap. I agree with that. So we've made a logic leap from that we didn't actually make this because the system's the way it was 4 years ago, which I said earlier. We've made a logic leap that because students in gen ed don't know exactly where they want to go now, the answer is to create this all-comers. You have 1,200 courses to choose from, choose 72 courses from Group A, 83 from Group B, and that's a program. And we're surprised there's no coherence there, right? Or no context, or no motivation. One of the other things I'm fond of saying, Kay McClenny is very famous for saying students don't do optional. She's from the SESI and University of Texas. I'm far less famous, but what I'm famous for saying is exactly 100% of our students are career technical. Exactly 100%. Some of them are career technical with 1 course versus a 1-year certificate versus a 2-year certificate versus a terminal degree. Every single one of those students wants a job at some point. If they're transferring first before they get it, They're still looking to get a job after that. They think that job is going to be better, which is, by the way, a whole other debate of whether that job's actually going to be better, depending on what they transfer into. They all want a job. Like, there are maybe a handful of students who are really here for the love of learning and they don't care what happens on the other end. You know, we like to think that that happens more than it does, but all of them want a job, right? So the question is, why do we not use some of the same structures for the students in the career technical programs on the gen ed side? The answer pretty much is just history. There's some other political answers, which is that we like teaching a wide range of courses in each discipline, and I used to love that too. But the question is that better for the students or is that better for us? Hard question, right? Let me one other point about this issue. And I don't know if you actually have this here, so this works better at colleges who have this. But there's one group of students who comes into the gen ed side every fall on most community college campuses around this country who often doubles the completion/transfer rate of other entering students. And it's sometimes triple. Any guesses who this group is? They're gen ed students. They're on most of all community college campuses, although they may not be here. Nope. No, although those are an interesting group too, kind of the reverse transfer group. Yeah. I'm going to answer this earlier because I don't think athletes. You guys don't have athletics. Does not North Carolina in general have athletics, or is it just some schools do? Okay. So pretend you have athletes for a second. So by the way, this athlete story doesn't work if it's four-year football and basketball programs. That's a whole other set of politics on four-year football and basketball programs, most of whom, by the way, are well above the kind of the belt on ethics, but some of them aren't. But in community colleges, unless you're in Texas teaching football, there are very few community college coaches whose jobs are determined by whether they win or lose. And most community college athletics programs are there to get students into education, some of them to transfer and play sports. But when you look at the success rates of athletes in community colleges, their average completion transfer rate is in the 60s and 70s. Okay, so why? They're cohorts. There's another cohort. I agree. That's one reason. What are some other reasons that is? They have a goal. They have a clear goal in mind. They want to transfer and play. Right? They have structured support services, sometimes structured tutoring. They have a coach. So they're connected. They're motivated. So the coach thing's interesting. I'm going to rename the coach for a second. This is very pithy. To an institutional agent invested in their success. This rolls off the tongue. That's what a coach is. It's someone from the institution invested in their success, which, by the way, is interesting because if you go back to those cohort-based CTE programs, you've got pretty much the same thing. Any of you CTE program chairs in here? Yeah, those people are basically coaches. They are invested in the success of their students. They also feel a moral and ethical responsibility to make sure that their people are trained for not only to get jobs, but to be safe and work in those jobs. Yeah, what else? Yeah.
And everything that you said is true, but they also take all of their classes together.
Okay, so good.
They're in a cohort.
Good.
They're basically in a cohort.
So they take all their classes together. So there's a couple things there, right? There's the cohort side of that, but there's also the structure side of that, right? Now, partially in some places, and I got to tell you, I was one of these guys when I was in college. I took one course every semester with the baseball team, even though I was kind of a walk-on the baseball team at Stanford, because they always found one easy course each semester to take together. I made sure I was there with them. One of them, oddly, was, the reason this was easy was well beyond me until I got there, Petroleum Engineering 103, which was known as Rocks for Jocks. Great course. Helped me get through. Rocks for Jocks. Yes, so but I'm joking a little bit about that. But the issue of, so athletes have cohorts, they have structure. Now again, the athlete-faculty relationship is sometimes tense, right? By the way, I think it's nowhere near as tense as the honors student, international student faculty relationship, which has a whole nother level of kind of angst about it, about getting an A. But so it's interesting though, athlete success rates are so high, lots of structured support, cohort-based. The team aspect of it, one of my now getting old jokes is, if you have a football player with 100 people, football team with 100 players on it, and there's 98 of 99 of those players want the starting quarterback to succeed in school. The other one's the backup quarterback. He's the only one who doesn't want the quarterback to succeed. But the rest of them are invested in success. They want him there on Saturday, right? Same with other sports. So it's interesting, and by the way, on average, if you look at placement rates, of students who are athletes, are they higher or lower than the average entering class? They're lower in community colleges, right? So these are students who are less, I use this very loosely in quotes, academically qualified, coming in, right? By the way, they're most often in many colleges much more represented from students of color than they are the general population, and they do better than the general population, okay? So this is a really interesting finding. Now, it's not to say we have the resources to do for all other students what we do for athletes, but it does cause us to ask ourselves, why are athletes so successful? Why are CareerTech program students so successful? Some of the same features show up there. You have cohorts, you have structure, you have an institutional agent invested in their success, and the coach or the program chair. You got a lot of stuff there, right? How many of us went to graduate school? Nearly everyone in the room. How many of you got to graduate school and they said, go ahead and pick your courses from a list of 50, make up your own program? So for graduate students who are the top X%, whatever the number is, who go to graduate school, we structure their programs. We structure the programs in CTE, we structure the programs for athletes, we structure it for veterans, by the way, quite often. If you have a veterans office, we do a pretty good job with veterans these days because we help them pick courses, and we help them structure things, and again, a group of folks who are on many levels have a lot of issues to deal with, also have pretty good levels of success. But the general population doesn't get any of those things, right? And so one of the questions is, how do we create for the general population some of these structures we create for other folks like athletes and for cohort-based CTE programs? So some other things in here. This idea of getting into a program of study, of when this decision's made, is an issue. Students failing to get through gatekeeper courses. You talked about that in the back. One of the things that happens, that first semester is a problem. Right? We know students who struggle in the first semester quite often leave, and if they stick out, they sometimes leave shortly after that. So in progress, and this is another one that I spend a lot of time on, which is, what are the 2 times we actually communicate to students right now about their progress toward a degree or certificate? When they're on academic probation, there's one time. What's the other time? When they're ready to graduate. These are the only 2 times we communicate to students about their progress. You're done, thanks for coming. Sign up for our alumni list. Or we used to make them pay for graduation, which you still do? Oh, God, that one. I don't get on the soapbox very often, but is that $50 we're charging them to graduate really in the grand scheme of things, helping the college's budget that much? I don't know. But we're putting another hoop in front of them at the end. So graduation's one time we talk to them. The other time is when they're almost gone on probation. At no other time do we give students any information about their progress. Think about that for a second. We don't tell them anything. Okay, so tell me about it.
We have a persistence and retention program.
Good.
I think it was funded for a little while by an outside source.
So did someone talk, how do they get in there?
Absentees get kicked in, poor performance gets kicked in within 3 weeks of their entering the course.
So kind of an early alert type model, right? Every college in the country has, nearly everyone has an early alert model. They vary widely in their uptake and success. Great, they all have a great mission, which is let's try to catch students. But so that's within a course, which is a great function, right? But one of the questions is, what do we do to help students think about between course issues or between semester issues? Yeah.
We're working on something right now that's
Good.
on Monday, called graduation checkup.
Perfect. Talk about it.
It's for associate science students only right now.
Uh-huh.
For the pilot for the fall. We're going to be doing it from October 28th to November 26th. And then we have emailed every associate science
Awesome.
student who has more than 30 hours completed. And we're doing this graduation checkup to see what courses they're in, how they're doing, what courses they've completed, what they still need to take to graduate.
Mm-hmm.
So I'll let you know.
There you go. So this, by the way, is why I liked, when I saw saw some of you guys at CBD, the 2.0 thing back in the spring. You guys had already started doing some things that are already along this path that we talk about in CBD. This is exactly what one of the things we're talking about. We need to do more of these things, right? Yeah. So hand.
I teach math,
Uh huh.
and we have been doing a lot more counseling.
Yeah. In the class, right? In the walls of the classroom.
Our own students than we've ever had before.
And so talk about so what brought you to that? Like just the
Well, the prereqs change across the board for the whole
Right.
whole college. The students have to know exactly what they need to go up through and complete.
Yeah.
In addition to just the logistics of the scheduling.
Right. And so, and how's it been, what have you found, that you're taking class time to do it, right? Which is a decision that's hard for faculty. Was that?
After class or before class.
So you're trying to do it around the class, but from within that structure. Yeah.
Yeah, it's working well.
Yeah, I think this notion of embedding student support where you know students are, and again, we have to be open and honest. We know our students aren't studying as much outside of class as they should. We know they're not availing themselves of the services they may really need to get forward. So one question is, how do we build that structure around the classroom? Again, those athletes and CTE cohort students, so it's pretty.
Some of my best students have been the athletes, the football players
Yeah.
that are going to transfer out here.
Because again, another thing they have that I forgot to mention, they have a ticking time clock.
Yes, they do.
Right, when you start playing, you got 5 years to play. And so you can't mess around with 4.5 years in the community colleges if you want to play in a 4-year school. Interestingly, I think there's a coming kind of crisis that we're going to have here. This financial aid change, which now has made a ticking time clock for all students who are on financial aid. I don't think we got our heads around this one yet. Because all of a sudden now, those students are in the same boat the athletes are in, but they don't have that sense of urgency built in because of the rest of the piece of that. If we don't watch out, and this is going to happen in a lot of places across this country, what's your average time to degree for those who actually do get through? Is it only 3? Well, you guys are lucky if it's only 3. I'd guess it's 3.5. It's 4.5, by the way, at many schools in California for a 2-year degree. I'm sure it's over 3. If it's not, you guys are doing it amazingly different than most colleges. But let's just say for a second it's 3.5 years. And you've got how many semesters in financial aid total? 5 years total, basically 10 semesters-ish of financial aid. So we get people who graduate in 3.5, 4 years, they're going to transfer and run out of money. Right? If we had no other reason to think of structure besides the other 50 I mentioned, we might want to think about it for this reason alone. Like if we don't get students through faster, they're going to run out of financial aid, and the students who need it the most, the ones who were most trying to get living wages and most try to change their economic conditions are going to be the ones who suffer the most. And I would argue that part of the way to fix this, and again, it's a hard problem to fix, part of the way to fix this is this issue of structure and monitoring feedback. So one of my other examples I love on this issue of monitoring feedback, actually let's turn this into the positive. So these are some of the loss points. So here are the momentum strategies, and I'll just throw these up there. They're kind of the mirror of a lot of these loss points, but I'll talk about a couple of them specifically. Someone mentioned early college or dual enrollment programs down here. Do you guys have one of those programs? Hey, what's the success rate of that program? 80%? Maybe, yeah, I'd say 80 conservatively. So now again, so here's another area, highly structured. Again, it's a unique group of high school students who choose this option, right? So there is a bit of an issue there. But we have high school students who are coming, doing these 1+1 or 2+2 models or 2-year dual enrollments, who have graduation rates in the 80, 85, 90% range. Again, high level of structure, a lot of student support around it. Taking the placement test in high school. This is one that people have tried. California tried this. One thing about this idea, California does some interesting things. They get some things right. I've been accused before of slamming my own state too much in other states. They put this program in a couple of years ago. Very good idea. We're going to give this placement test as high stakes. They're not going anywhere near where you guys are and actually fixing that in North Carolina. And so they said, we'll give the placement test in high school. We'll give it end of junior year so students can see where they are and react in senior year and maybe get what they need to pass the placement test when they come to us. Now, if they passed it junior year, they're exempt and they're a transfer and everything, which of course only 5% of community colleges pass it because most of the ones who pass it go to 4-year schools directly. The problem was, so think about that for a second. So they take it spring of junior year. They get the results back summer in between junior and senior years. Their fall schedule is already set. They can do nothing to actually affect change based on that information aside from go take Kaplan, which of course is not the student we're working with here, right? The students who have the resources or would even know that that's available to them. So we have to be careful when we think about the progression of things. I think that's one of the neat things about this framework and the idea of thinking about things in terms of educational trajectories is we got to sequence things a little better than we do. One of the other things we tend to do with students, like by the way, is your orientation mandatory or is it optional? Mandatory orientation. So how long is the orientation? 45 minutes. It comes like somewhere before the first part of the... It's online. So by the way, doing orientations mandatory versus optional is certainly better, right? Doing it mandatory. We also got to think about We're trying in 45 minutes to tell students everything they're going to need to know for the next, well, we hoped 3.5 years. And it's basically a fire hose, right? And one of the things we have to kind of maybe get our heads around is how do we give students the information they need right now? Not tell them, and again, 45 minutes, you're probably not doing this too much, but telling them everything you're ever going to need to know in the next period of time. And by the way, humans are horrible at taking that information. So like, we're all bad at this. By the way, if this happens in 9 months, here's what you're going to do. Even 19-year-olds who have far better memories than I do not deal with that information very well, because when you get into the situation, it's a whole different story. Like, there's all the stress and angst around it. So mandatory orientations are great, and it's one of the things people in CBD do, by the way. But the idea is, what do we do with students who just finished their first semester or their second semester, or know actually these graduation checks you guys are talking about, a great step on that path. Ed planning in high school. So this is one of my favorite ones. The idea that, so we like to say students are undecided, okay? So we don't know what they want to do. So one of the Aspen Prize co-winners from this year, which happens to be from California, Santa Barbara City College, has a really interesting program. Santa Barbara takes every 9th grader in their region and has them fill out a 10-year ed plan. So every freshman in high school in the greater Santa Barbara area, and by the way, you think of Santa Barbara and you think a lot of rich people on the hill, because it's actually got one of the highest median incomes in the country, but they are an HSI. They're a Hispanic serving institution. Over a third of their students are very poor Hispanic students from the other side of Santa Barbara. So they are doing this, it's easy to think of them as like creaming the top and getting the winners, but they also have like 70% of their students on financial aid. So they go to every 9th grader, they fill out a 10-year ed plan, including whether they want to go to community college, 4-year, technical, and they, by the way, update it each year, 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th grades. And so one of their leaders said, we know they're going to change their mind 100 times, but at least they're getting the information earlier, they're getting it in a structured way, and they're thinking about it. So they're taking this idea that you can't help students decide what to do, and it's not a tracking thing. Like, we want to be careful this doesn't turn into tracking, where we put all the better students in science courses and we worry about the other students and throw them into career technical, that high schools have had a problem with historically, this, by the way, at times. The idea of this is to have everyone shoot high and think about a higher goal, and they've found this incredibly successful. And they update it every year. So on a couple things with that. One is ties to K-12 to be able to pull that off. Pretty strong in that area. That school happens, that the high school, not the principal, the superintendent of the high schools in the area and the community college president meet weekly to talk about ties between the college. Pretty amazing. Like, I don't know how anyone finds the time to do that, but they actually do it. So this idea of ed planning back in high school, and again, the thought here is let's get students thinking about the choices a little bit earlier. Intrusive advising focused on programs of study. So the idea of advising, we talked about, you get 45 minutes with those who raise the hands, and it's hard for you to take in that 45 minutes and try to match students to programs, right? You're trying to do some of that, but it's very challenging. So one of the questions is, how do we pull this function off? Some of it may have to be online. If you want to look at a model, your neighbors to the north in Virginia, which I know probably you're tired of from the dev ed side of looking at them for a model. I would be if I was in North Carolina. They have something called the Virginia Education Wizard. You guys seen this thing before? You actually just Google it, Virginia Education Wizard. You go online and you take one of those classic psych skills like tests that tell you what career you should be in. It told me I should be a riverboat gambler, which actually is fairly accurate now that I think about it. But it just to give some idea of here's some things you might be interested in. What's cool about it is then it lists where in the state those programs are and how much people make on the other side. Okay? So that's pretty darn cool. Now, I think the students they're still trying to figure out ways to market it to get more students to use it, but there's a way of tying it in to what the end game is. And by the way, their end game could be transfer for you guys to UNC, to Chapel Hill or to UNC Charlotte. That could be what their end goal is. But there's this idea that we can help them think about programs of study. The other thing about counselors, by the way, is, and I did a little of this at the time, it's impossible for you to know what it's like to be a surge tech versus an accountant versus a phlebotomist. You're not in those fields, right? So one of the things here is getting our discipline faculty to talk about what it's like to be in this field and figuring out ways to share those stories with students. One of the colleges in Texas, I really like what they do. They come the day before classes open, the kind of Monday before classes open on a Tuesday. All the faculty come and sit in their offices. And they're there for exactly one reason, and that's to talk to the students about what it's like to be in their field. Not to do say, here's the 6 courses you need to take. But if I'm a statistician, I'll talk about the jobs that are available to people who get degrees and certificates in statistics and what it's like to be in the field. You know, I think if we did this with more pre-nursing students, there'd be less students actually interested in the blood side of nursing or the less glamorous side of nursing. There's another thing we do is we save all the hard parts until they've gotten in. And you know, we have the issue with nursing sometimes is the students who kind of, they tend to be self-selected. They have very high success rate, but there's a group of them who don't actually know what it's going to be like to be a nurse, right? And they may actually be happier being, you know, surge tech's probably not going to fix that problem, but other allied health areas. So this idea of kind of getting students into programs to study earlier. And then I'll talk about this one again. Great to hear your graduation monitor thing or checkup going on, because that's the type of thing we don't do. You guys are about to have, you guys taking the iPass thing, working with the technology so that, not yet? Okay. So Sinclair Community College, which is in Dayton, which is one of our CBD schools, pretty innovative school. They do a lot of interesting things. They've had this model called MAP, My Academic Plan, for a number of years. This thing's pretty cool. Everyone on campus, including students, faculty, administrators, can at any point enter this portal and get to what a student's actual pathway is and what their progress is along that pathway. So everyone can see the same information, but they do some other things, which is kind of interesting. When a student registers for courses and they pick a course that's not on their path, a screen pops up and says, hey, by the way, you're about to register for a course not on your path. Do you really want to do this? Because I guarantee you that student doesn't know that they've either taken that requirement 4 times or that there's other sections open. Here's the Santa Fe in Florida, which is, I don't know why Santa Fe is in Florida, but it is. It's the feeder college to the University of Florida at Gainesville, the flagship institution in Florida. And they have a similar, completely independently designed, also called MAP. And theirs goes one step further. Theirs does the same thing. It lists all the courses you need to take. It's kind of a clunky interface, but the idea is really solid. And then students say, when they want to come to class, so they're building a fall schedule, let's say, with my work schedule, I can come Monday, Wednesday, Friday from 10 to 2. They plug that in, and it bounces against all the courses they need for their pathway and suggests 7 sample schedules of courses that would fit their pathway. So this sounds like a technology solution, but I would submit to you that the technology is one small piece of this. They've changed their business processes around this. They've decided we're going to use the information we have to help students get through. Austin, by the way, this isn't just 2-year schools. One of the things we often have a problem with on these type of projects is we think that, yet again, someone's trying to turn us into technical high schools, or someone who doesn't understand community colleges. Their 4-year schools are doing some of this same stuff. And two of the top ones are 3. Florida State in Tallahassee has a model where they go even further down this path. They have established markers for success in every one of their degree programs. And so it's usually 5 to 7 things. Some of them are course grades, there's a combination of courses you need to have taken by a certain time. And so what they've done is if you miss any of your markers in a given semester that you're supposed to have achieved in that semester, you are mandatorily, making up words as we go along here. You have a mandatory advising session to actually be able to register next semester for any courses in that area. So they call you in and say, hey, what's going on? We saw you missed this. So there's a kind of a focused counseling side, advising side to it. If they miss it again the next semester, they got to change majors. End of story. Now that's pretty far out on what we would consider the draconian end, and you would be worried, like I was the first time I heard this, about graduation rates going down, and I was also pretty worried about equity, that this would happen differentially to different groups of students. The graduation went up 10 points, rate went up 10 points, and they've also closed their equity gap. Okay, this isn't the only thing they did, but think about the idea of this. Is they're doing that same thing the pre-nursing folks from Stark are doing. They're catching students early and trying to get them into an area that they can succeed in. Got to worry about tracking, got to make sure we're not just tracking students into like less demand wage areas, but they're not finding that. Yeah, they have a slightly higher entrance requirement than we do at Florida State, but it's interesting that even they do this. Where you wouldn't think you would need to do it as much there, they improved their graduation rate by 10 points doing some other things and this. Austin P next door here in Tennessee is a national leader in how they use data for kind of providing feedback. They go a step further by saying, all right, we see where you are in your program pathway, and we've also looked at the courses you've taken and the grades you've gotten in those courses. And they've done some statistical crunching, And what it does is it predicts courses that you will have on your pathway that you'll have a high chance of success in. So it's the Amazon model. People like you, brief aside on this one. What do you think the biggest item in supermarkets bought with diapers is? Next biggest item bought with diapers? Beer. Beer is the next biggest item bought with diapers, right? It's the power of analytics. So you should have the beer aisle and the diaper aisle back to back. But the Amazon, like in this again, when I was in the industry in the late 90s, there was this whole movement that's almost exactly the same as what we've had the last couple of years in higher education, which is, man, we just need data. We need to look at the data's going to set us free. And one of the things that happened is there was this huge dashboard movement. Everyone wanted a dashboard, right? You guys are nodding, you've all heard this movement. There's nothing wrong with dashboards, by the way. Don't think that's where I'm going with this. But so I was a consulting firm where at this time I was younger, and I was the guy in the back of the room going, I wanted a dashboard so they could see all their data visually, and then magically somehow the world was going to transform. So I'm in the back of the room, raising my hand, like, so what are they going to do differently after they have the dashboard? And I was met with stony silence because we were getting paid $500,000 to put in the dashboard. But what you found, by the way, later and after I left this industry, is you went back to those companies who put the dashboard in and talked to the folks. So before the dashboard, there were like 5 power users who had access to the data and used it. And after they put the dashboard in, the other 95, by the way, didn't really look at or use the data. You put the dashboard in, those same 5 people had the availability to look at data graphically. The other 95 people didn't look at it at all still, right? Or they didn't use it. Like, it is not the technology that's the answer. The technology is an enabler, right? And so many of and I talked to the CBD colleges in North Carolina because they're getting a version of that Sinclair map product in their schools, which, by the way, is eventually going to be public domain that you guys could use too. And the thing I keep saying to them, I'm going to say it again in 2 weeks at the retreat, is you got to think about how you're going to use this thing, right? It's more important how you use it than actually having it. And so things, that you can think of on this pathway of using information. So again, this one's. The thing I like about this is that we could do these things tomorrow. In fact, you guys are doing some of these things literally tomorrow, next week on the graduation check. The question I think we ask ourselves here is, what would if we knew a group of students had these similar things happen to them, what would we want all of them to get or have happen, right? So on the graduation check, one other thing Georgia State does. Georgia State, by the way, possibly, this is an urban school in the middle of Atlanta, possibly the most transformational story of improvement in higher ed in the last 10 years. They had a 32% graduation rate 10 years ago, which sounds abysmal, although it's similar to ours. Sounds abysmal. It's not that different from most large urban colleges. It's 10 years later, their graduation rate is about 55%. They've increased it by 20 points or 67%. They've done a lot of things to do this, to make this happen. But one of the things they do each semester is they run, I think they call it I would name this something different, the good and bad report. And what they do is they look at students whose GPA has gone down by more than 0.25 in that semester over their average, and they contact them. They say, hey, we saw you had a tough semester. Come in and talk to us. Let's make sure everything's okay. Where'd you struggle? Again, focused, customized advising. They also, by the way, talk to the ones whose GPA went up by 0.25 or 0.3, and they say, great job. You had a great semester. We're excited for you. Here's what you have next in front of you. These are the type of things we could do. Not saying that's the only thing, but we never celebrate progress, right? We never celebrate progress toward the degree. And if you think about it, we all know in our world about whether we're progressing towards, if you're me, like elite status on airlines, because I'm flying all around the world. Like, I'm excited when I get 3/4 of the way there. I'm almost going to get to sit in a less crappy seat. Like, that's what I'm excited about. Man, that'll be great. Then you realize, wait, this still sucks, but that's okay. It's all right. That's why they have beer on planes. It's fine. But for students, we don't do any of this. Like, it would not be hard, by the way, in any given semester to send an email to everyone who just passed the 50% threshold toward their degree and say, hey, nice job. Why don't you come in and talk to us about articulation, because we want to make sure that because we have all this structure issue, if they decided they wanted to go somewhere different, you guys, I think one of you may have heard this story. One of your colleagues up at Guilford Tech, Christy Short, she analyzed, as part of CBD for Guilford Tech, all of their GE courses and listed how many of them transferred in the major to all of your 17 institutions. So they're like 180, 200 courses going this way, little check boxes when they transferred to which of the 17 institutions. Exactly one course transferred to all of them. 1 out of 200, and that was English 1A, kind of the comp level English. Not a single other course transferred to all 17 colleges. And by the way, I'm very sympathetic to this, because I live in California, where there are 115 community colleges, there are 23 California state universities, and there are 11 University of California schools. There's not a single consistent articulation agreement. I can't even do that math of how complicated that is. It's horrible, right? And you guys have a version of that you're trying to fix right now, which I think, was that?
Any student can succeed at any time, given the right set of circumstances.
Again, that sounds like new agey kind of, oh, we got a mantra. They live it. They live that there. They fundamentally believe, by the way, Georgia State, who made that transformational improvement from 32 to 57%, they say the same thing. By the way, the Georgia State story is they did that over a 10-year period when their SAT entrance requirements by SAT stayed exactly the same, actually went down 10 points. They did it when their percentage of African American students went from 40 to 60, and the percentage of students on severe financial need went up. And they still improved graduation rate. They say the exact same thing. We are stopping asking for better students or a different group of students. We're going to make the ones we have succeed. And we're going to do it because we own that, right? And again, it sounds... You argued? You argued with... Right, and I've had the same conversation with Sandy, and I throw some scenarios at him too, but it's hard to argue with Sandy. But, all right, so back to this. This idea of managing the information we have, right? So, again, one of the colleges we work with, Walla Walla in Washington, who was another, I just like saying that, Walla Walla, Washington, has basically one of those fundraising thermometer things for their students, so they can see where they're going, right? Again, if you pick a random student out of one of those classrooms right now, what percentage of them do you think, A, know what pathway they're on, and B, know where they are on that pathway? Like what percentage done they are? I'm guessing it's a handful, by the way. And this is not saying that there's anything wrong with Gaston. This is what we've all done, right? This is how we operate. So the last part of this, and we've got about 20 minutes left before you guys head out to lunch, I want to throw to you the CBD design principles. I'll give you this presentation, by the way. At the end of it, I'm going to show you there's a series of inquiry guides that I and a couple colleagues wrote that are intended to be used in the field. They're available publicly. There's one on the kind of using data for looking at completion data in a new way. There's one on using data and creating a culture of inquiry. There's one on the loss momentum framework, and it comes with a lot of design questions and stuff you can take out from this room into other meetings. And there's one on these design principles. And I'll give you the link afterwards. So this is the idea now. The program pathway, we're going to move students through here from connection, entry, progress, completion. At some point, they got to enter a program of study. Should probably help them figure out what those are. And by the way, you have 70 or 40 majors. I bet that 4 of them cover 80% of your students. I bet if you look at the majors, when you look at who actually graduates, I bet a handful, 4, 5, or 6, cover 75, 80% of your students. So one thing you might consider doing is, let's structure those ones first. We already know most students are going to land there. Although I'd also, on the other side of the coin, argue, if we did a better job of structuring some of our more esoteric majors, we might get more students in them. Because they actually try to be able to figure out how to get through them a little better. All right, so here's the status quo. Here's what it looks like right now for pathways, for these pathways. We got AA requirements that are not aligned with requirements for junior standing in a major. You guys are trying to fix this in North Carolina right now, which is very impressive and laudable. And, you know, that's a tough process. You know, you got those 41 courses. There's some politics around whether your course is on that list or not and how often it's going to be offered. That's a challenge I'm sure you guys are well aware of. At the end of the day, I get to stand on the outside and say things like, let's remember who we're doing this for. We're doing it for the students. It's easier for me to say that because I'm not one of the people teaching like psych and law like I used to teach, which there's no way would be on that list. But it's a challenge. Lack of clear path, and by the way, transfer with junior standing in a major is different than transfer, right? We have this issue. Go back to that financial aid problem. If we transfer students and they have to take 18 credits over, there's another semester of financial aid they're losing, right? Not all of this is us. This particular one is a lot about the 2 4-year issue, and then we're working on that one too, as you guys know. Again, right now, progress towards the AA and transfer is not tracked. There's little ongoing guidance or support. No mechanism to inform choice of major pathway. We talked about it. It's the catalog. That's pretty much what it looks like now. And this last one you're already working on. I didn't talk about this idea that DevEd's narrowly focused on math and English and not customized to particular paths. I've got some data that I can share with you that suggests we, by the way, have let math and English become this proxy for what actually college readiness is. And again, both math and English are important, and I in no way want to devalue the importance of math or English. But we leave a lot of things on the table that when we use math and English as the only proxy for college readiness. When there's some data that suggests, by the way, that we might want to think more about things like confidence and motivation and hope and the non-cognitive things and the study skills and the life skills that actually would help students succeed both in math and English and when they get to the other courses, right? And we have to think about that more than just saying those things are important and not doing anything about them, to actually structuring how we build. And building some of it into the classroom is one way to work on it, right? And it's a challenge to fit all that in. But DevEd has been narrowly focused. It's often devoid of real-world context, right? A lot of students, no student came to this campus to take DevEd math or major in DevEd math or DevEd English. It's not why they're here. They may need it to get where they want to go, but that's not why they're here. It's another thing Sandy talks about Valencia. Every one of those students is in a transition through this college. They're either transitioning into a career, they're transitioning to transfer. We got to stop thinking about that this is their end goal. It is not the end goal of any student to get through DevEd math. That's a step on the path for them, right? And most of them, it's disconnected from anything they actually want to do. And by the way, that doesn't have to be that way. There have been attempts to connect and customize math and English for a number of years. It's a 30-year-old idea. It happened in the late 70s and was highly successful. And we got rid of it because of institutional cultures issues, right, and some logistics. A buddy of mine has taught an algebra for the humanities course for 35 years. He's got a success rate that's 15 points above the average because students who are in there are from the humanities, they know what they want to do, and he tailors, it's not that he dumbs down the content, he tailors it to them. He puts things in their language, and there's a success rate 15 points higher. So we actually see success. So I'm not going to spend too much time on some of these. They're all here. But here, pathway principle number 1, let's get people into programs of study. Right? Here's the structure issue. We talked about why we need structure. We've got it in the CTE programs. We've got it for athletes. The idea here is that there's a structured, efficient, and prescriptive student progression experience. Now, somewhat in your case, because of the policy issue, there's part of this problem is going to be taken care of when you go down to those 41 courses, right? You know that students who are trying to transfer or think they're trying to transfer are going to focus on those 41 courses. There's still a question about, for example, what maybe is the appropriate humanities course for an accounting major? I think that's a pretty good question. I don't think I should decide that. I think the accounting people should decide that. I don't think frankly, I'm honest about this. I don't think the humanities people should decide that. I think the accounting people should decide that. Does it mean that humanities isn't important? Of course not. I actually think this is a chance for the humanities to find some context in a lot of these areas where they don't find context, and vice versa, by the way. If you're a humanities major, what's the right intro science course for you? It's probably, not that anyone's taking organic chemistry, but there's these connections between these two things. What's the appropriate math for a history major? Right? These are questions, we can decide these things, by the way. And this, one of the things we're trying to avoid, of course, is the kind of direct connection of like 58-degree programs that we would have math for each one of. But there's kind of this idea of meta majors or communities of interest. Miami-Dade is moving down this path where they're going to have students who come in their first year who are taking DevEd math and English. It'll be focused into one of 5 big areas: natural science, social science, humanities, business, and I don't remember the other one. But they're tailoring somewhat to those 5 areas. And again, not down to the ground about doing it for welding, but they're doing it in kind of these big areas. And they're seeing, they're starting down this path. Clear sequence of courses that lead to completion. When Sinclair last year, they structured all 100 of their degree programs. They totally restructured it. They threw it to the faculty and said, what should this degree look like? And the faculty came back with a list of courses, a sequence of courses, even default electives. They went that far. The accounting people got together and said what that humanities course they do. They did it for all 100 of their courses. This is not a small college. There's nothing special about Sinclair that should make them able to do this. This is part of their redesign in CBD. And also, all these have discussion questions you can kind of take out of this into other rooms. The The second one, minimize time to get college ready. So this is, if you know, again, we won't spend too much time on this because you guys are obviously doing 12 things on this already at a state level. But the idea that students actually understand the assessment and placement process. So right now, as of this fall, you got a bunch of them who are exempt from it because of their high school grades, but still for the rest of them, let's make sure they know what this is about. Let's make sure they're prepared for it. Talk about placement test prep programs. Miami-Dade last summer, who, by the way, has 180,000 students, 100,000 of whom are credit. It's the largest institution in the country, undergrad or grad. 100,000 credit students. They have 10,000 entering new students every summer. Last summer, they, for those 10,000 students, had a mandatory all-day orientation, and they also did these boot camps for placement tests. They let them take the placement test first. If they tested below college level, they gave them the option of a 1-week free boot camp, where they came back and it was basically a week of instruction, whether in math or English. The whole idea was to retest. What do you think happened at the end of the retest? 50% of them tested 1 level higher, 25% tested 2 levels higher. And when you followed them into the courses, they did fine, the same as those who tested in there the first time. We own more of this than we think we do. Again, I'm pretty passionate about this, and we got to stop just looking for ways or inadvertently keeping people out of transfer level courses. We need to find more ways to get them in there, right? And give them the confidence and motivation to think they can succeed in there. And then this idea of clearly communicating requirements for degrees and certificates. This is a lot easier if you have structured programs and good articulation, right? It's harder now. So here's another story. Miami-Dade, when they were still dealing with this issue of structure about how much, the structuring thing's a little scary. It's not where I would start a CBD redesign because you're talking big curricular issues here. You could probably have a better chance in North Carolina because of the stuff you're already doing. But at Miami-Dade, even though they were in completion by design, about a year ago, they were still struggling with this issue of how to restructure programs. And they had, which was a really good idea, a group of the 27 faculty. They had 27 big departments in the gen ed area, which of course is probably too many, but 27 big departments. They had a faculty representative from each in a room helping with the redesign. So good job with engagement. They were literally turned this over to the faculty. I talked to their provost. He's like, it scared me, some of the names of that list, but I had to do it. If this was going to work, it had to be this group of folks who were chosen by their peers. So they got together, and things were kind of stalling a little bit. And so what they did is, to make the case for this even stronger, they had one of the faculty was a biology faculty. They had the biology faculty leave the room. And they asked the other 26 faculty to design the ideal pathway for a biology major using only materials available to students. And they couldn't do it. They struggled it with a couple hours. They could not put a schedule together or a 2-year pathway or a schedule that actually would be the ideal pathway for a biology major. And this, by the way, is biology, where it should be easier, right? There's more of a clear sequence of courses there. So if they can't do it, and these are smart people like the rest of us, how do we expect our students to do it, right? We are letting them be the ones to solve our issues. And we're then surprised when many of them don't. And so this issue of structure is, again, this idea of let's make it clearer for students and again, it doesn't have to be 100% prescriptive. The Sinclair one is, here's your default elective. But most of our students, by the way, here's the last point on this structure issue. What do you think students say about structure? They love it. We have this is another myth we have in our heads, is that students like finding themselves. Like maybe 2 in 100 students are here we're going to find ourselves, and we all have this like romantic notion that what we're here to do is help students find themselves by taking 80 courses, which by the way worked great in Oxford in the 1650s when everyone was from the ruling class and they were going to be part of the ruling class no matter what happened. Fast forward to the 1950s in America, college didn't look that much different. Pretty much only the upper class went, and again, didn't matter what you majored in, just get a degree. You can go work for an insurance company somewhere. Like pretty much that was the path, right? We democratized higher education in this country after the GI Bill. We made it. It's what we're all here for. We didn't change the structure any, right? The structure still exists from that old model. And this idea that it's the students who have to navigate this, not us, is a little scary. Number 3, ensure they know. This is the idea of mapping out the requirements in sequence, prescribe programs of study, customizing contextualized instruction. We talked about this one. Integrating student support with instruction. You're doing it in your classroom, right? Where else do we currently integrate student support with instruction? Same answer to the earlier question. We do it for athletes. We do it in CTE programs. You know, the program chair of a CTE program, if they're not providing the student services directly, counseling and advising, they're pointing the students in the right direction. Like some of our colleges, we've dedicated counselors to certain programs. There's that whole model of general versus specific, which is a debate. But those folks know where the student support is. It's integrated with instruction if you're in those type of programs. It's not for our students who probably need it the most. By the way, this is a principle that's on every change effort I've seen in the last 15 years says we need to integrate student support with instruction because it's hard, right? And one of the things that Davis and I used to joke about is whenever I present to a group of student services people, they say if we could just fix some of those instructional things, things would all be better. When I meet with the faculty, they say if we could just fix those student services things, things would all be better. It's human nature, guys. It's social psychology. It's in-group, out-group. Even when we like each other, it's in-group, out-group, right? We always think the problem's solvable somewhere else. And so one of the things we got to do here is kind of capture more of that. How do we collectively solve these problems instead of making it someone else's problem? I got to tell you, I worried about this in CBD because when the first year of CBD, the planning stuff came out, it was a lot about trying to fix student services and not a lot about the instructional side. It's harder to get to the classroom, but down the road, let's just think about touch points for students. Who hits our students the most? Hits the wrong word. Let's try that again. Got a story about that too, but that's a different story. Who makes the most contact with our students? That's not good either. Okay, we don't want to make contact with students. Students are most in front of faculty, right? No matter how much they use student services, the front line of all this is the faculty in the classroom. And we have let those four walls be lead for decades. Nothing gets in, nothing gets out, right? And I'm not saying we need to monitor faculty. That's actually the last thing I'm saying. What I'm saying is we need to learn from each other. We need to figure out how to be better at what we do, right? We need faculty to talk to each other. And sometimes that happens better at places than it does others. But if we're going to fix this, it's got to focus on that too. And also how to integrate student services into there too. I think it's a great point. A couple minutes to go. All right, here's mine. Continually monitor student progress and provide feedback. We can monitor and celebrate progress. We can use data to inform planning and creation of safety nets, right? We do this a little with early alerts, but we don't do it a lot. Like I love that idea of if someone's GPA is 3.6 and all of a sudden they have a semester at 2.8, we should talk to them about it. It may just be they took harder courses. But even that, by the way, there's a whole Hawthorne effect here from actually talking to students about what's going on, about saying, we actually care, we know what's happening with you, we care, we're here to help. I'm guessing most of our students don't feel that way about us as colleges, right? Faculty members in classrooms do some of that on the ground, but more faculty members in classrooms also can't, most often, look at the sequence of courses that's 30 courses long and know where a student is in that. You know, I used to teach an intro stats class, and I had people in there who are in their last semester, their first semester, their middle semester, they're all over the place. And that experience is very different for that student depending on where they are in that pathway. My other favorite example of this, any of you guys heard of Baby Center? So Baby Center, I have a 10-year-old. It's a 10-year-old story. Baby Center is this thing you can sign up for when you're expecting. I wasn't expecting, but we were expecting. And you enter your due date. So we say their due date's February 15th. And then every couple of weeks, you get tailored information based on where you are in your pregnancy. You know, end of month 3, it says, hopefully you stopped vomiting, and now you're focused on the fact you're getting bigger, right? It's down to this type of level, right? People like you often experience this at this point. You know, as they get to the end, by the way, they do stuff like, they know if you're a first parent or not because you've entered that data. Hey, you're 6 weeks out, you're wondering how the hell you're going to do this. It's okay, everyone wonders it. Like, it's tailored to where they are in the progression. And by the way, they send an email on my son's birthday every year saying, your son's 1, here's some things you might have to deal with now. Your son's 5, your son's 7. Like, this is not complicated. This is like a 3-item or 4-item survey you fill out to get to this level. We have so much information on our students, behaviorally, and I'm not talking about demographics. I'm not saying we want to say, you're a poor kid whose parents didn't go to college, so therefore we're going to treat you this way, right? What I'm saying is we got a lot of behavioral information. Students have taken courses from us. We know how they did in those courses. We actually know, if they were on pathways, where they are on their pathway. We can use this information to kind of monitor this progress. And I ask you this, I think this is one, if you're going to leave with some to-dos, you could think about, and you guys have started doing this, what are some customization rules you would want to have? Like the technology is a piece of this, but what are some things you would want to do as a matter of course? 7, reward behaviors that contribute to completion. This sounds like paying students. It also sounds like performance-based funding. But I think this second one's really, by the way, there was a college in Louisiana who had this program that said if you did your first 45 units with a 3.0 GPA, we'll pay for the last 15. Pretty good motivator. Long Beach City College, who's the one I mentioned earlier on that STEPS project, they've worked something out with a local funder that all students coming from Long Beach High School have their first semester free at Long Beach City College. Just one semester, but gets them in the door, not worrying about that. So it's interesting ways of doing this. This second one, though, we can all do. Recognition of progress. Tell students, you're halfway there, you're almost there, here's what you have left. You're doing a great job. Institutionally, we don't do that. Faculty do that in classrooms, we don't do it institutionally. And then the last one, this is kind of just so this is a Gates project. Gotta have that word technology in there somewhere. So it's Gates, they're Microsoft, it's all. Use technology to monitor and celebrate the use of technology. I think it's important, I joke about it a little because I think we focus too much on the technology and not enough on the business processes. So if we did this, wrapping up, if we did all this, the world might look like this. Program learning goals are clearly defined and aligned with transfer and junior standing or for career advancement. The pathway is well structured and prescribed, electives supporting learning goals. Progress is monitored, feedback given just in time, and we have on-ramps to actually help people pick a program of study and move forward. This is what we're trying to build in CBD, and by the way, we're not telling colleges how to do it or what to do on it. That's the cool thing about these design principles. They're general enough that you can say, how you structure things here may be different than how AB Tech structures it or how Central Piedmont structures it. You may make different decisions, perfect. You know, the idea is that you use the principles to kind of help redesign things. And at the end of the day, I think it's going to be I am very optimistic, I got to tell you, about what's going on in this country right now around community colleges and improvement. There's a lot of challenges, the accountability and funding challenges, initiative fatigue, you know, kind of getting hammered from all sides. But there's a lot of promise here. What you guys are, and I'm telling you, what you guys are doing in North Carolina, it may be the bleeding edge, it may be the leading edge, depending on which side of this you're on. But the work you're doing in DevEd on the kind of modularization following the Virginia model, the work you're doing on this placement thing and this multiple measures thing, I am very excited that you're doing it because I think it's actually going to help change the country. I really don't want to understate that at all. I believe in 5 years, this policy will be in every state in the country. And it's a good thing. It'll be painful, a little bit painful, and hopefully folks can learn from you. What I'd love to get a grant to do in a couple of years is do case studies with you faculty who've had classrooms change under this model and find out what changed and what we should do about it and what we should tell other colleges, right? Because I guarantee you, there's going to be a point at which some legislator in Oklahoma is saying, wait a minute, you're telling me they made this change in North Carolina and now they get 60% of students through DevEd instead of 30? We're changing that, and they should. Like, I'm not a big legislation should cause change thing because I think we should probably do it ourselves, but I don't think it's fair to students that if we know we have something that's going to work twice as well, we don't know it yet, but I'm guessing it's going to be close to that when you talk about the number of students getting through, that it's going to help inform the entire country. I saw a hand.
I was just going to say, I worked at Valencia for 9
Oh, cool.
years when they were developing their life map model, and I do want to emphasize it took years.
Yeah.
And it took a lot of hours, a lot of weekends, but where they started, and I haven't heard you use that word, was with learning outcomes. And it took a collaborative effort,
Yep.
not just learning outcomes in programs or with courses, but also within all of those touch points
Yep.
within student services. So what will students know we're able to do because of
Absolutely.
testing or orientation? And then they took it a step further and said, we're going to identify these 4 core competencies that every student,
Right.
when they complete, must have, and it was think, value, communicate, act. TVCA, and they made sure that no matter every.
Oh, I've seen that acronym on their stuff. I didn't know that's what that was for.
TVCA, think, value,
Huh.
communicate.
I thought it was the Tennessee Valley
So that every
Authority.
course had to, in their catalog, say, to what degree does this help a student think
Yeah.
or value, and then, of course, there were operational definitions for all of that. But it did.
And it was a culture change, right? It was a culture change, and when you see what's happened over time. And so one of the reasons I don't bring up the learning outcomes thing as my final point is because we've, unfortunately, because of accreditation, too often, that's taken things in the other direction. The promise of learning outcomes and assessing them authentically leads to this, if it's done authentically. Unfortunately, what's happened in certain areas, and I think you and I are in the two where this has been most problematic in Saxton and WASC, is it's led too much to formalistic checkbox, we've done it type things because that's what they ask you for. right? And that's what you're almost forced to do. But the promise of it, and you've seen it in some of these Aspen Prize colleges, they really do use this for improvement. So last thoughts. There's a series of inquiry guides that you can get off the website, inquirytoimprovement.com. Sounds like I'm selling them. They're free. I'm not selling them. One of them is on building a culture of inquiry. One's on the lost momentum framework, which we talked about today. One's on completion and the nuances of completion, and one's on the principles of redesign. They're 25 pages, but they got a lot of they've got a lot of discussion questions in them that you can take and use as you think about this process of redesign. And your folks are coming on Thursday to hear me again, and others. But where they're going to come back to you guys as your participation in this kind of scaling of CBD is to start thinking about over this year some things you would want to do differently going forward using these design principles. And you're going to get some pretty cool data on Thursday about some of your success that's customized to you guys too. So thank you for your time and your conversation. If you want to chat, I'll be around a little afterwards. And feel free to fire me an email if you ever want to ask about any of this stuff at this email address here. Thank you very much. Happy lunch.